Hello fellow gardeners, I'm Andrew with Tail Wagon Farms. We're located in Zone 7B, 8A, depending on which map you look at, on a little over an acre in North Carolina. We started out growing initially with some raised little pots and some shoddily built raised garden beds, to now we have in-ground beds, raised garden beds, cut flower area, hoop house, and a heated greenhouse. My goal on the farm is to grow as much food as I can possibly eat. Her goal is to grow as many beautiful flowers as she can for bouquets, dried flower arrangements, and just to have beauty all around our yard and for the wildlife. Hopefully, we'll be able to teach each other a few things, and I can give you some tips and tricks that we've learned over our 12 years, and hopefully teach you how to cook some stuff up, maybe ferment it, other preserving, and hopefully save some money for all of us in the process. So today is Seed Starting 101. I've broken seed starting down into 7 different elements: seeds, soil, light, containers, timing, water, and the environment. Number 1 is seeds. The most important thing with seeds is to get them from a reputable company. When you order from a reputable company, you know what you're going to get. That's not always the case for if you order from like Etsy or Amazon or eBay, any of those type sites. Sometimes you'll plant the seeds and something completely different will come up than what you ordered. Some of the seed companies that we like is Johnny's. Just got this catalog the other day for their 2024 offerings. Botanical Interest, Baker Creek. Those are ones that we primarily order from. One of the most important things is that when you order seeds, that they give you a lot of information on the seed packets. So if we look at the Botanical Interest seeds, I'll give a close-up of this, but it tells you, your days to harvest, how big the plants are going to be, how far to space them out, light requirements, water requirements, all very pertinent information for what we're doing here. Another thing with seeds is to remember that seeds don't last forever. Some seeds, like onion seeds, you'll plant them one year, they'll germinate great. The next year, if they're a year old, you won't get any germination at all. That's just been my personal experience. So, the next element I want to go over is the soil. So, what we're going to look at with soil is this is our growing medium. What we have found is that if we use potting soil, stuff like that, we have horrible luck. We end up with fungus gnats, mold, algae, other pathogens, and the seeds just aren't as happy as they could be. The mix that we like to use is Pro Mix HP. It's a high porosity mix. It comes in 60-pound bales. I think they make smaller bags now of Pro Mix, but it works really well for seed starting and sometimes soil block making. But the key is you want to use something that is specific for seed starting. That'll give you a better chance of being well draining but not holding too much water. Small particle size will help with the germination rates. The one thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is do not use your garden soil. If you use your garden soil, you run into the risk of possibly introducing pathogens or aphids or the dreaded fungus gnats or mold, algae, any of that stuff, and we want to get our seedlings off to the best start we possibly can so they'll be the strongest plants that we can possibly have later on. The next item is lights. Lights are essential to the growth of your seedlings. When we first started growing indoors, we started with fluorescent bulbs, the T8 variety, with the daylight bulb with 6500 Kelvin. They worked pretty well. All in all, they did have their drawbacks. So they were initially cheaper to buy, but the cost to run them was higher than what we currently use. Also, the T8 bulbs did put off a bit of heat, so that was kind of hard to juggle with the tender seedlings that we had. We've now switched to full spectrum LED lights, which are a little more expensive initially, but the cost to operate them is much lower, and they do not give off nearly as much heat as the T8 bulbs did. Now, one really nice feature of the LED bulbs is they also are dimmable. So the LED bulbs that we use now have a remote control, and you can dim them to 50 or 60% of max brightness, which is great for seedlings because that's all the amount of light that they really need. Any more than that, and you're going to start running into the risks of it being too bright. What you really want to try to avoid is you don't want your plants to get leggy. So that's when they get really tall and kind of flop over. That is a really, really tough condition for a seedling to recover from. And we had more problems with that when we were using the T8 bulbs, because you had to get the light bulbs right down next to the seedling, and then you had the heat there. Had to run a whole bunch of fans to try to dissipate that heat as much as possible. So next is number 4 is containers. Containers are what we're gonna be growing in. Sometimes people don't even use containers; they use soil blocks. Some containers that people use is I've seen people use egg cartons, little styrofoam trays for meat, any plastic they have laying around the house. I've seen solo cups. All different options, they all work. For us, we found that the best option for us is we use the typical 10-20 trays or 10-10 trays. This is a 10-10 tray, it's 10 inches by 10 inches. And these are the 10-20 trays, which we have deep ones, we have shallow ones, we have ones with holes in them, like this one, that we use in the greenhouse for top watering. What's really nice about the 10-10 trays and the 10-20 trays is when used with cell packs and other containers that fit in there, you can bottom water. So we won't be getting as much water on the top splashing up onto our seedlings. Our personal favorites are, we like these 32 of these will fit into the tray. They're good for bigger plants. And then our personal favorite are these 6-cell trays. You can get them from places like Bootstrap Farmer or Epic Gardening sells them. They have a big hole on the bottom, so it's easy to pop a seedling out. They have air pruning slits on the side, which it helps them not get as root bound as in other containers. And the best part is they're made of harder plastic, so they don't crush as easily. You can throw them around, they're not going to break, they're easy to wash, and they're reusable. We found that a lot of the cheaper plastic tends to break after 1 or 2 seasons, and they get real brittle in the sun or under the lights, and these just seem to last a lot longer. The next item is timing. Timing is crucial to starting seeds. So what we want to do to start out is figure out when our last frost date is. This is the average date that the last frost of the year happens. For us, in 7B, 8A, where we live, it's usually around the 2nd week of April. We can look this up on the Farmer's Almanac, or you can look it up on like the USDA website. You punch in your zip code, it'll give you your average last frost date. Now remember, this is the average. So sometimes it can be a couple weeks after that or a couple weeks earlier. We have to kind of plan that when we're timing our seeds. So on the back of a seed packet, it'll tell you, start these indoors, say 4 to 6 weeks before they need to be transplanted out. So what we do is we take the last frost date, we use a calendar, and we count back a certain number of weeks. This example I'll give you is 8 weeks before frost. This is her calendar. It's got all the flowers on it. I haven't done my vegetable one yet because I've just been kind of falling behind with stuff around the yard. But 8 weeks before the last frost is the week of February 18th this year. So we need to start verbena, butterfly bush, echinacea, monarda, petunias, straw flowers. There's like 15 other flowers that we need to start that week. So we know that when we get to this week, we need to have space under the lights for how many we want to plant, and that we have all our seeds ready to go. This will give us the best chance at having strong transplants when we go out into the yard. We don't want our plants to be too small and have to catch up, but the other issue that you can run into is if the plants get too big, they get root bound as well. This will really shock them when you try to transplant them, and it'll really stunt their growth going on. Now, we're fortunate that we have protected spaces outside to grow in. Between a hoop house, we have row covers that we use outside, and then we have a heated greenhouse as well. So we can be a little more flexible with our start dates on stuff. If you do not have protected areas to grow in, your best bet is to err on the side of caution. So if it says 4 to 6 weeks, your best bet's to go with the 4-week range. because it's better to have a plant that's a little smaller than one that's under the lights that's full grown and root bound in a pot with 3 weeks of winter left to go. So hopefully we can start to time it up right and get everything out when we want. Another little tip is to keep a garden notebook or spreadsheet that you keep track of the date that you started those seeds, when you potted them up if you needed to, when you transplanted them out, and little notes of, hey, I started these a little too early or a little too late. Next year I can maybe change the date on it. My example is last year with tomatoes. I started the tomato plants about 3 weeks later than I should have. I had short transplants going out into the field, and it ended up being that the tomatoes weren't ready to harvest until like 3 or 4 weeks later than usual, so they fell right in the peak of our pest pressures. So I had trouble with stink bugs, squash bugs, and we lost about 30% of our harvest, which was a real drag when it came to canning season, because now we're a little behind going through the winter with stuff I have on the shelf to eat. Item number 6 is water. Water is the essence of life, but too much of it can be a bad thing. So what we're looking for is we want our soil to drain well, but not hold too much water. This will really help with our watering needs. So what we're looking for when we water is you don't want the plant sitting in standing water. So one thing that's nice about the 6 cell trays is you can lift the cell up and look underneath and see if they're standing water or not. We also don't want them to dry out, because then the plants wither and die. If plants are too wet, they can do what's called damping off, where they also flop over and die, and you can lose a whole tray of seedlings overnight. So one way to check this is you want to look at your plants and see, feel the top of it, make sure there's not a ton of water. You just want it damp. You don't want it bone dry, you don't want it pushing down, water pushing out. You can look on the 6 cell trays on the sides and the air pruning slits and see how dark the soil is. The lighter soil is drier. Another thing that you can do is use a humidity dome to keep some of that moisture in there until the seeds germinate, and then you pull the dome off and then let them grow up like that. Anecdotally, for us, water, our city water, is not very good here. I don't know which chemical it is that they put in it, whether it's chlorine, bromine, but our seedlings really do not like the water. So what we have to do is fill up gallon jugs of water, and we let it gas off for a couple of days at a time. And that seems to really help that when we water the plants, it doesn't seem to affect the seedlings as much and stunt their growth. The next item is the environment. This is crucial. We're lucky that we were able to start our seeds inside, here in our seed starting room / bike shop / workshop. It's just an upstairs bedroom. We don't have a garage, so we make do with what we have. It's climate controlled in here, so it's around 70 degrees. And we have a ceiling fan in here for some air movement. And a lot of seeds have very specific requirements with what they like to germinate in. Lettuces don't really like to be above 70 degrees or else their germination suffers. Things like the nightshade family, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, they like it a little warmer than that, and you can supplement that using a heat mat if you need to. The seeds usually will still germinate, it just takes a little longer if you don't have the heat mat. But for like our super hot peppers that I grow, they like it around 80-85 degrees. So we plug in a heat mat, let the soil temperature get higher, and it really speeds up the germination. One caution with using heat mats though is make sure the temperature probe on the thermostat is where you want it to be. Last year I knocked the probe out onto the floor and the heat mat tried to catch up, and the soil got up to about 115, 120 degrees and fried an entire tray of pepper seedlings. So that's a mistake I'm hopefully not going to make again, and hopefully I can save you from making that mistake too. Now I want to make sure I give you guys a little bonus tip, and that tip is labeling. This is super important. I've made the mistake before. We've all made this mistake before. You get done with your 5th tray of seedlings, planting your seeds, and next thing you know, it's dinner time. Eat dinner, get a little tired, Like, I'll go upstairs and do it later. You fall asleep on the couch. The next day comes around, you got a bunch of stuff to do in the yard. You're like, I'll get to it later. And the next day you walk upstairs and you go, I have no idea what I planted in this tray. 2 weeks later you look down, you're like, I have an entire tray full of some sort of brassica. Not really sure what it could be. It could be kale, it could be broccoli, cauliflower. No idea. So you got to go out and plant them out in the field, and it becomes a waiting game to see what the heck did I plant. You can save yourself that frustration by making sure you label your seedlings. So what we like to do, and what we've found works best, is use a label maker. By using a label maker, you're able to print out labels for each individual 6-pack or each individual tray. And when you pot them up into something bigger, you can take the label off and stick it on the new one. Or when you plant it out in the field, you pull the label off, put it on a plant stake, put it out in the field. They seem to hold up much better than the garden markers or pen or pencil on a popsicle stick. And we just get a much better idea out in the field of what we have planted. And towards the end of the season, the labels still look clear, so we're able to tell what we got going on out there. Well, I have to get some lettuce and onions started today, so I can give you a demonstration and show you how it's done. Come on along. I'm going to show you how to start the Landis winter lettuce from Baker Creek. First step you want to do, label your container. Next step, take your soil, gently fill up all of these cells, smooth over the top, gently press down, firms the soil in all the way to the bottom of each cell. Add a little more to top it off. There we go. Next step, it's lettuce. Likes about 1/8 of an inch deep. So we'll make some little holes, little wells for it. Use our seeder next. You can use an index card or a piece of paper for this. It'll work just as well. This is from Johnny's. I like to put typically 2 to 3 seeds per cell for lettuce. That way I can make sure I have 1 plant per cell. I'll come back and thin them later on once they get their true leaves. But after that, just add a little more soil on top, smooth over the top, and this lettuce is ready to go in its tray. Now I'm going to show you how I start onions indoors. This onion today is a short day onion called White Castle from Johnny's. What I like to do is I use a 5x5 container, and I just take my onion seeds, which are in my hands, and I just sprinkle them fairly thickly. Onion seeds typically don't last more than a season, so spread them around. Once I'm done with that, top it with some soil, firm it down good, and after those come up, I won't actually thin them. I will continue to grow them out of in this container, and then I'll separate them once they're ready to plant out in the garden. Well, fellow growers, thanks for coming by for Seed Starting 101. Hope you learned a thing or two. If you got any tips, comments, questions, leave them down below. Thanks for coming by to help me start my lettuce and onions. Hope to see you next time, and happy growing.